Yeah, good evening, all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I welcome you all, professors, special guest speakers, and everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We'll start the program. My name is Srinivas, by the way. I'll be anchoring today's event. I think first I would like to invite Professor Nikhila to come on to stage to talk about today's event. What is it about? Why is it being conducted every year? And probably for the newbies, whoever has come for the first time, they should know, no? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We are now good to go, and I hope you will have a really wonderful evening. We have a whole set of events lined up for the evening. So at what looks like a cold year end, a warm welcome to all of you for a set of events that will unfold this evening till probably early night. As I don't want to come back for an elaborate vote of thanks to ruin your lingering Rasanubhava after the play, please bear with a slight break in protocol as I will use this time on stage to give a short background to this annual event, welcome you all, as well as thank all the people who have made possible this program today, as they do every year. It was a small gathering of friends and students with Kannada Bhava Gite in 2010 that the practice of celebrating the birthday of my father, Sri K.V. Subba Rao in Hyderabad began. Since then, every year we feel my father's presence in our midst as his birthday has become an occasion for gatherings like this, for meaningful conversations, mellifluous music, and since the last 7 years, a November program means a Hyklu production. Sometimes other events constellate with the Hyklu play, as it has happened this year with a panel discussion and books release. This year's program is even more special because Kuvempu was not only one of my father's favorite writers but also his teacher. About a fortnight before he passed on, when I had just returned from a seminar in Kuppalli, the Ku in Kuvempu's acronym stands for Kuppalli. My father held my hand and said, next time you go to Kuppalli, you must take me with you. But that was not to be. Nevertheless, we are bringing Kuvempu onto the stage this evening. Another reason it is special is that we are celebrating a translation of Kuvempu's novel, Malegallalli Madumagalu, carried out by Professor Vanamala Viswanatha, someone whom I have known as a 19-year-old as my teacher of Hamlet in BA, teacher of romantic poetry and ELT in MA, and the supervisor of my research during my PhD. And like every good teacher, she always wants me to do more and is never satisfied with what I have done. Thank you, Professor Vanamala, for agreeing for this program and coming here. When Professor Vanamala and I discussed possible panelists for the event, she said she did not want those who necessarily knew the novel in Kannada. So except Professor Madhava Prasad, to all the other panelists, Bride in the Hills is their means of acquaintance with Kuvempu. I thank all the panelists, Professor Susie Tharu, Professor Madhava Prasad, Professor T. Vijay Kumar, Professor Vanamala Viswanatha, Dr. Imogene Hansdak, and Dr. Gita Viswanath for accepting our invitation to be a part of the panel this evening, reading the voluminous novel and coming here in spite of the many other things that might have required their attention. It's not every day that we see such a galaxy of stars on one stage. So I'm very happy that it's happening so here. Professor Deeptha Achar messaged me one evening that she would be here for this program as the Anveshi national consultation dates are coinciding and that the stars have indeed conspired so. Thank you, Deeptha and Sukanya, friends and senior colleagues, for thinking of this as an appropriate forum for releasing the Kannada titles of Anveshi's Different Tales series. A month ago, Ashokan casually told me that his book by Bloomsbury is expected to be out soon. And when I went to Manipal where he teaches, I told him that we could release it here if it came out in time. Ashokan was my student in the first batch that I taught at Pondicherry University in 2002. And I'm so proud and happy that his book, based on his PhD research, is releasing at our forum. And we have distinguished people like Professor Susie Tharu and Professor Vanamala Viswanatha and all of you to do the honors for the 2 book releases. There will be a separate introduction to Hyklu troupe by Taresha, so I won't say much, except thank you all very much, Team Hyklu, for giving generously of your time for the practice of this play, Bicycle Enters and a Bride Elopes, that is based on a few episodes of Bride in the Hills. And all the best for today's performance. You're going to perform before a set of people who are here to encourage and also to enjoy your performance. I'm not sure how to say thank you to Tharakeshwar because I don't know what all to thank him for or where to begin. But I must acknowledge his commitment to see this through, though it may not have been as per his wish or plan. When I asked Srinivas here if he will compare this program, he asked me, what are your other options, ma'am? I said none. Every student here who has agreed to contribute your efforts for this program, whether the Hyklus or others, is important and irreplaceable, and I'm much indebted to you all. So it's not illi yaru mukhyaralla, yaru amukhyaralla. It is illi neevu mukhyaru, navu mukhyaralla. You are important and not us. Thanks to Ratan and Dilip behind the camera and Manoj behind the camera, which allows us to live stream today's program. It will also be recorded, so we are documenting the event. This November event has truly become a national program with participants coming from so many different places: Delhi, Baroda, Maharashtra, Bangalore, Mysore, Hospet, etc. There are some friends like Vijay Kumar Borati, Gita Viswanath, Imogene Hansdak, Shailaja Hiremat and her Amma, who have been here before and come again and again to encourage us, and also probably because they like being here. There are also many students, colleagues, friends from Hyderabad in the audience here who have come who have come before and have come again to be a part of this event. I cannot name you all here for want of time. So a warm welcome to each and everyone who has come here this evening in expectation of witnessing something truly rich and memorable. There is a whole back-end team that helps me keep my mind and body together so I can function. First of all, my mother, who controls the rhythms of the house and my life from her bed. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without the support of, well, they are all not here, but I have to mention them: Lakshmi, Prasanna, my mother's helpers, Shivarani, Swarupa, Sambaraju, I don't know if he is here, Janardhan, Srinivas of the tent house, Kishan Singh for sound and lighting, Mani caterers, who are always just a phone call away. Thanks to all the office bearers of My Villas, particularly Dhanalakshmi Madam, for facilitating in every way the conduct of this program, and to all the residents, particularly those in the vicinity, for not complaining about our activity. Thank you all, and I hope you'll have a wonderful evening, and it's now over to you, Srinivas.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that elaborate welcome. Now I think we can move on to the next program, which is a panel discussion on Bride in the Hills, an English translation of Kuvempu's Malegalalli Madumagalu. I request all the panelists to occupy the chairs on the stage as I read their name out. I would like to invite Professor Susie Tharu. Ma'am, Susie Tharu, ma'am, please clap. Professor Susie Tharu and Professor Madhava Prasad. Professor T. Vijay Kumar who teaches in BITS Pilani and Hyderabad campus. Dr. I.V. Hansdak, ma'am, please come on to stage. Professor Vanamala Viswanatha. Now I would like to invite the moderator for this panel discussion, Dr. Gita Viswanath. As Gita is going to introduce all the panelists, I am going to introduce her. Gita Viswanath has a PhD in Literature and Film Studies from the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda. She has taught for a decade in college and university. She is the recipient of a fellowship from the Social Science Research Council, New York in 2006. Her study, The Nation in War, a study of military literature and Hindi war cinema, was published by Cambridge Scholars, UK in 2014. She has also published papers on cinema and Indian writing in English in journals and edited volumes. She is the author of 2 novels. Twice it happened in 2019. It was released in 2019. And A Journey Gone Wrong, 2022. And a children's book, Chidia. Her poems, essays, and short stories have been published in online journals. Her short films, Family Across the Atlantic, and Safer Zonans, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, ma'am. Safe Zoners, sorry, are available on YouTube. She is the co-founder of an online film discussion forum called Talking Films Online. I think many of you know Talking Film Online. Now I request Dr. Gita Viswanath to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinivas, for your generous introduction. Good evening to all, and my gratitude to Nikhila for inviting me every year to this warm, intimate event she organizes in memory of her father. Today, my task, and an onerous one at that, is to moderate a discussion of Kuvempu's magnum opus, Malegalalli Madumagalu, that took him 31 years to complete, and this has been translated into English by Vanamala Viswanatha as Bride in the Hills. We have a high-powered panel here, and that is, to be honest, making it really nervous for me. Let me begin by introducing the distinguished panelists. Professor Vanamala Viswanatha, a bilingual scholar and a translator, is known for her translations of Purnachandra Tejaswi, Vaidehi, U.R. Anantamurthy, Lankesh, among others. She has also translated ancient and medieval Kannada texts into English, including Vachanas, The Life of Harishchandra, and others. She has taught in the Department of English in Bangalore University until her retirement. We have with us one of Indian academia's most illustrious teachers, Professor Susie Tharu. Susie Tharu is writer, publisher, professor, editor, and women's activist. She has had a long career as professor and head of the English department during the time when English and Foreign Languages University was known as Central Institute for English and Foreign Languages. She has been part of the Subaltern Studies editorial since 1992. She served on the board of advisors for the Feminist Press, where she was also a publisher. She has taught in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Delhi and Kanpur. Tharu, along with other women, founded Stree Shakti Sangatana and Anveshi, 2 women's activist groups. She has edited 2 volumes of dossier on Dalit writings from South India that focus on the resurgence of Dalit politics in the 1990s. Her most well-known work, of course, we are all familiar with it, which she edited with K. Lalita, is the 2-part anthology, Women Writing in India. She has received the Uganda Government Merit Scholarship, Makerere College, Uganda during 1962-65 and the Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship during 1994-96. Also with us is Professor M. Madhava Prasad, who was Professor of Cultural Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, until his retirement a couple of years ago. He earned his master's degrees from Bangalore University and Syracuse University, New York, and received his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. He was Bliss Carnation International Visitor at Stanford University, California during 2018-19. He's the author of Ideology of the Hindi Film, a historical construction and cine politics, film stars and political existence in South India. He has written widely for journals of film studies, performance studies, linguistics, and cultural studies, and has published numerous translations of prose and poetry from Kannada into English. Professor T. Vijay Kumar is a former professor and head and chairperson, Board of Studies, Department of English, and Dean, Faculty of Arts, Osmania University, Hyderabad. Currently, he is visiting professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. His research interests include post-colonial literature, Indian writing in English, translation, and multilingualism. His publications are in the areas of critical studies, translations from Telugu, and textbooks. He is a TEDx speaker, as well as the director of the annual Hyderabad Literary Festival and one of the founder editors of Muse India, the literary e-journal. Dr. I.V. Imogene Hansdak is a poet, scholar, and translator, working as Associate Professor in the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. She did her MPhil and PhD from JNU. She has authored 2 poetry collections titled The Golden Chord and The Prism of Life, besides editing her father's autobiography, A Doctor Among the Santals, the autobiography of Dr. Stephen B. Hansdak. She has published several research papers in edited volumes and scholarly journals. She is also a translator of Santali fiction into English. Since 2020, she has been editing an online journal titled The Johar Journal, of which 2 issues have been released. So we will begin now with the panelists speaking about the book, and then look forward to participation from the audience. Susie, I invite you to speak first.
I have so many thanks to make that I don't know where to start. So first, I think Nikhila and Tharakeshwar for running this amazing gathering that they do every year and sharing their commitment and love for literature with so many people from different walks of life who choose to come and participate in it. It's an act of such generosity and love for their own work that it's inspiring for all of us. And that's one of the reasons why, for me, they are very, very special people. But I also want to thank them because through this event and because they forced me to, I read this 700-page novel, which I would have put aside. 700 pages is not something you take on very easily. So I'll read it tomorrow, I'll read it next week, I'll read it next month and so on, but I had to read it now. But of course, the bigger thanks goes to Vanamala, who must have spent months, maybe more than months, working on this mammoth translation, and which is a very challenging translation. It's not an easy translation to do, as anyone who reads the book will understand. And only because she translated it, I was able to read it, and I must admit that it was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed reading. These days you don't read things that you just enjoy. You read because they're something new, they're doing something different, they have a political statement to make that you haven't met before. But reading a novel just for enjoyment, it's a long time since I've done that, and this has happened. So thank you, Vanamala, especially for that. When I read a good translation, I like to almost forget that I'm reading a translation. Not totally forget, but almost forget that I'm reading a translation. And I can honestly say that this happened to me more often than not as I made my way through this long novel, so it gave me a lot of pleasure. So that's the first starting point, the pleasure. But I want to start, before I talk about the translation itself, let me say a few things about the novel, because, what to do, I'm a literary critic. I automatically think about what is this novel and how do I respond to it and what is it. So first, let me give you a timeline. I don't know how many people here were born before this date, but the novel was published in 1967, okay? That's a good 70 years ago. It's not a contemporary novel, which means that Kuvempu would have been writing it for over the early 60s, definitely, and maybe in the late 50s. It's a huge task that he has. So it's written in the 1960s, but it's set in the 1920s. So both these periods are lenses through which we view the events in the novel, the Kuvempu moment and the moment that is being depicted. Kuvempu belonged to the central and powerful Mysuru Bangalore region of Karnataka. And it's the region that really sets the tone for what we think of as Kannada culture today. And the novel is set in the north of Karnataka, in one of the marginal areas, the forested Malnadu area, where the culture is somewhat different. It's a rural life, it's various other things. I mean, I don't need to tell people in this audience about rural life in India. So we're looking at the earlier period through the lens of the latter one. The 1960s gives you the lens through which we are looking at the 1920s. And it's also, we are looking at this far-off place in rural Karnataka through the lens of central Karnataka. So you can see that it's a very layered novel. It's not like a straightforward story that you're reading multiple layers that are going through it. Well, 1967 is well after the linguistic reorganization of states, but this distant and still largely unpenetrated Malnadu with its distinctive geography, culture, and dialect, dialect is a translator's war, I think, yeah, awaits a more fulsome embrace from the Mysuru, Bangalore centers of the Karnataka world. So this is the task that the novel takes. It tries to pull in Malnadu into Karnataka. It owns up this region as belonging to the center. It's another and quite different kind of initiative. It's like the initiative that Sardar Patel takes, if you like, when he goes around the country in the 1950s to draw in the states into what could be a combined, unified Indian nation. But there's more to this 1920s moment that it affects the novel, that we see in the novel. It is in the 1920s, in the wake of the uprisings of the Mapla peasant farmers against their largely Nambudiri and Nair landlords, that Gandhi makes some of his early efforts to engage Indian Muslims. Okay? The RSS leaders, Hedgewar and his supporters, were so deeply opposed to these moves by Gandhi that they break away from the Indian National Congress in 1925, and they formed the RSS in 1925. So this is what is the big public moment of the 1920s that Kuvempu is also addressing. So given the urbane humanity which Kuvempu extends to every other section of society, how he treats or depicts women, a variety of lower castes, including those who might be considered untouchable. Given all that, given that great humanist warmth of the book, I found the unrelenting depiction of Muslims as thugs, outsiders, and dishonest traders, I found it very disturbing. So there's the 1920s moment, remember, against which you have to think about this. As for Christians, the narrative has nothing but contempt for the local padri, very likely to have been an untouchable or other lower caste origin. But the white missionary who also seeks to convert, but promises a modern school, is given a wholehearted welcome. So these are some of the contradictions in the novel. Then again, though the 1920s story is rooted in the forests of the Malnadu region, there are hovering figures, notably that of Swami Vivekananda, which connected to the larger imaginary, not only of Karnataka, but of India. Vivekananda's Chicago speech and the resulting Western recognition of Hinduism is one of the world's great religions. We all know this, we've all grown up hearing about how America recognized Vivekananda and Hinduism, is often described as the founding moment for the idea of a common Indian culture. It's not just Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and Kerala and so on, but there's a common Indian culture, and that's the starting point for the new thinking about the common Indian culture. Kuvempu textures and enriches that vision as he embraces the border regions of Malnadu, its forests and its people, and as he draws them into the folds of Karnataka, and then the grander narratives of India, and of a kind of universal humanist redemption. There are layers at which it's doing. He's a very sophisticated writer, there's no doubt of it. Very intelligent and very sophisticated. There are two other key moments, two other key notations that I would like to make. The novel is published in 1967, a few years before the Busa controversy erupts in the mid-1970s. The Busa controversy, for those of us in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh who haven't followed the Karnataka discussions, is a moment when Dalit MLA, he was actually a minister, said all of Kannada literature is Busa. I think Busa means the same thing in Telugu, and it means chaff, the outer covering of the grain which is thrown away or given to cows, and it's a useless kind of thing. So he makes this huge statement that all of Kannada literature is Busa, and of course there was an upheaval, everybody was infuriated, and there were protests and so on. And you must say, to Kuvempu's credit, that he supported the Dalits. That it would have been a very difficult and intellectually strenuous exercise for him to have made this support. But what does he say? He says, yes, it is true. Much of Kannada literature is Busa, but not all of it is Busa. Okay? And I think that's a kind of telling statement, because DSS is not really making an assessment of Kannada literature. DSS is talking about the caste nature of Kannada literature. And that's where Kuvempu is wrong. It's not that there are some pieces that are not casteist. All of Kannada literature, like all of Malayalam literature or all of other literatures, until the Dalit movement comes along and raises this question, was an upper caste, casteist kind of literature. This is not to dismiss it. It was an important literature. There are interesting aspects to it. It is doing great things, but it's also this. It is also this. So you see that sliver of a difference between what DSS is saying, that what we're talking about is the casteist nature of mainstream literature, and Kuvempu, who takes it on but twists it just that little bit to say it's an assessment of good versus bad literature. Okay? And that is a shift that you find, that it shows you the ideology in this novel as well. It's again a great novel. What I'm having to take you through these fine distinctions to give you a sense of what it is achieving at that moment. So what do we see? This is a telling statement. DSS was pointing to the caste character of Kannada literature, the whole of it, and its authorities and values. They were not talking about specific works. Kuvempu's response undercuts the structural force of the argument by turning it into a humanist one. The novel, his novel also, is untouched by the Dalit question. The mid-1970s, broadly the post-emergency years, is also the time when the feminist movement emerges in different parts of the country. Kuvempu's extraordinary tenderness towards his women characters has often been remarked upon, and it would seem that the kindness of good men and the courage of women, primarily to run away with their lovers, that's the sort of, what can I say, revolutionary break that they have, is all that is needed to break the chains of patriarchy. So there's such an important moment, and it moves you because Kuvempu is such a rich and a good man, you know. You can't dismiss what he is very easily. I noted that in the appreciative forward afterword by Devanura Mahadeva, that he sidesteps all these, he's a very smart man, Devanura, sidesteps all these controversies and stresses the ecological contribution of the novel. He suggests that the land and the forests, its teeming flora and fauna, its hills and streams, is as much a protagonist as are the principal characters. And that is certainly true. So you can see we're looking at a very, it's an epic, this novel. It's very elaborately structured. It has massive dimensions, which are social dimensions and historical dimensions. It has political dimensions. How is it talking about bringing the Malnadu region into Karnataka and so on? So I've taken a long time about the novel, which I must say I loved. I really enjoyed reading it. And I want to turn a little bit to the translation. As I said earlier, I thoroughly enjoyed reading Vanamala's translation. And what is more, I mean, Walter Benjamin may not approve of this, but on second thoughts, maybe he will. I knew, but I didn't feel that I was reading a translation. I knew I was reading a translation, but I didn't feel it. Some reasons for this. If we consider the fact that English, fact of English having many avatars, you know, for instance, American English, Singaporean English, and so on, I think we can say that Vanamala has chosen to translate into an English that is accepted as standard across India. It's a fine-tuned decision to make. It's not such a simple thing. And that accounts for my comfort with this language. This is not American or Canadian or British English. And we do have now a number of celebrated translations into those variants. There are important translations, some of them done in collaboration with Western translators that are into Canadian English or American English or British English. But this, I think, is an Indian English translation. Yeah, what evidence do I have of this? You can sense it in the use of an idiom or the turn of a phrase, in the choice of diction, in an exclamation, or even in the rhythm of a sentence. Most importantly, in the many things the translator chooses to pass over as part of a common culture and therefore as not needing gloss or explanation. So the translation may not have turned English into Kannada, but I believe that it has moved a few steps in that direction. I must also mention my delight in finding once every so often that the translator had searched the nooks and crannies of the English language for a word or expression that was rare but singularly apt. And you know, being a student of literature, you delight when you find a word like that, you know, that is not commonly used but is just right for that position. So if Kuvempu can be thought of as drawing the Malnadu region into an imagined Karnataka, in the English narrative, Malnadu becomes part of India. It's a different move that happens in the translation. I encountered its streams and forests, its trodden and not so trodden paths, its trees and its animals, its fields, its roads, its people, the tea shops, toddy shops, ration shops, moneylenders, the hills, the forests, the fields, etc., etc., and the various homesteads with a certain familiarity and even a sense of belonging. Given what I have already said about the Dalit and feminist issues, I confess that I did not feel the same closeness to these lives as the novel depicts them. You know, that was not working for him. I'm told that Kuvempu uses the Malnadu variant of Kannada in the novel. Clearly this is lost in the translation. So is what may have been the major achievement of the novel, the binding of this outlying area into Karnataka. You know, that we don't see that in the translation. That's not. But what is gained? An absorbing, eminently readable, and enjoyable text.
Thank you so much, Susie. Vanamala, would you like to respond to what Susie has said, or would you like to listen to all the panelists and come in the end? Okay, okay. Yeah, Professor Madhava Prasad.
Right. So, hello. Yeah. So, thank you to Nikhila for inviting me for this event. I come here most years of this program. I've been here for various music and theater and other things. But today, speaking in, academically, so to speak, sitting here, it's different. I almost said bhayo or behno to begin with. So it's, I hope this will not be, the dissonance will not be too much for the audience. So, Kuvempu's Malegallalli Madumagalu was neglected by translators for a long time because it's not easy to do this. So apparently 2 translations have come out in the Vanamalas and another one. So finally, I guess people have 2 people have taken the courage to attempt this, and this is a wonderful news, generally speaking, because this is one of the what I'd like to call the great novels of the mid-20th century in India, in the subcontinent. The 20th century, roughly from the 20s to the 60s, is a period of a flourishing period for fiction, novel writing, and I say great, not as in terms of as a value judgment that they are great novels, but they're also of vast scope. They tend to be, and they tend to be realist in the very classical way. And these are, you can see across the subcontinent, there are many such, Godan, Mailanchal, Malapalli in Telugu, Tarashankar Banerjee's novels, Chemmin in Malayalam, and I'm sure there are many others. So it's one of the richest periods of novel writing in the classical kind of tradition of the social novel in India. The social novel, to my mind, is the only specifically modern novel. You can use the word novel for all kinds of prose narratives, but that's not to say that the novel is generally any long prose fiction. The specific modern novel form, which is about 200 or more years old, in that tradition, the classical, where society is the place where things happen. Contemporary society is the place where things happen. And contemporary in the sense of, not today, this moment, but, a period which is close to us. Now, Kuvempu himself contributed to that tradition of the category of great novels, to my mind, when he wrote the first novel, which was published in his name, Kanuru Heggadati. It belongs really in that category. Well, for whatever reasons, as the introduction to the translation tells us, he began to write this novel, but kept it aside, put it aside, wrote Ramayana Darshanam and other works. And then 30 years later, he published it. Now, it also says that 80 pages were written. So, assuming these are the first 80 pages, it would be wonderful to do a stylistic analysis of what happens, with the two phases of writing. And I think one of the things you can see is that time and space are both united in this journey of the Guti from one place to another. That's, it seems, if it is indeed the case that 80 pages were written first, the first 80 pages, then it seems that Guti's journey, which is the binding thread of the novel, up to a point, is the part that was, written. After that, it just spreads. It just explodes, and the space becomes, wide and complicated into, multiple crisscrossing sort of narrative characters and events and so on. Now, to that class of great novels of the mid-19th century, but in some ways it exceeded that brief, if you like, because it ceased to have, it just dropped many of the characteristic features of those novels. It just put them aside. It's extraordinarily set aside what he, for instance, in Kanuru Heggadati gave us an idealist character who is the Rani, So you have, instead of Huaya in Kanuru Heggadati, you have Guti as the one who is the only sort of thread that runs through, and of course after a while even that thread breaks. It's the linearity simply ceases to function after a while, and time acquires multiple characteristics. There are multiple types of time that you get in this novel. The time, for instance, of Guti's journey, which is a very straightforward space-time continuum, which are the same. Then you have the parallel times, right? In different, there are these houses, 4 or 5 different houses, that is typical Malad sort of structures. Villages are considered one big house, and the vassals or the Dalits and other tribal and other populations living, around, and serving that house and living around, and similar structures, spread out. Time here is, you go back and forth between different houses, telling the stories of different characters in these different houses and their connections with each other and their trades, and with each other, various exchanges with each other of marriages or exchange of goods and so on, and family rivalries, which end up in houses sort of separation and so on. So it's in that sense, it sort of is in that category, but also not of it. It just exceeds that, and becomes quite an extraordinarily singular text. It's formally speaking, one of the most amazing performances in terms of the writerly craft, to my mind. So a complex play of time. So parallel montage, as I would call it, using a cinematic term. Things happening in the sort of different places, so that time, when the movement of time, when it is broken up like that and parallel montage, takes over, time moves slowly, right? It's because the same thing, the same time has to be described in different settings. So the linear progression of Kanuru Hegadati is gone, and a more complex play of time is introduced, giving the reader the impression that temporal progression is reined in by spatial expanse, and reminiscent of the way vehicles on the ground might seem to move very slowly from a great height in the sky. Chronotype, another chronotype, if you like, that's functioning in this novel, is this 700-page novel. Is the first, about half of it has taken place in the space of about 4 days. After that, it's unclear how much time has passed, but I don't think that the novel's entire time frame is more than 3 months at the most. 3 months of activity. You can imagine the kind of, the expanse of the novel and the time within which all this action has taken place, and out of those 3 months, it's only, I'm saying 3 months because it's towards the end there are passages where you can't sort of make out. There are very weak indications of passing of time, and in fact, my first inclination was to think that everything here has happened within the space of a month or less. I would, possibly argue that if I had more time to look at the novels and this extraordinary compression of time as a consequence of the expansion of this spatial dimension of the novel. Absolutely incredible kind of treatment of these two very essential aspects of fictional narration. Now, another chronotype which figures here is simultaneity, right? So the action here is taking in the late 19th century, actually. So there are these moments when the author is connecting things happening in this area with what Vivekananda is doing in some place or the other. The first instance being when he is giving the speech in Chicago. So when he's doing that, the missionary is converting somebody or trying to convert somebody. And when when Vivekananda is sitting in Thousand Islands, he sees a vision of Mukundaya planning to thwart the conversion, this is one other. Vivekananda features even in the first novel. So he's very strongly influenced by Vivekananda's philosophy, which includes reincarnation as a very. Vivekananda has written about it. Reincarnation to him is an idea that only the Aryans thought about, and only the Aryans were capable of thinking. He's given an elaborate argument about this. And it seems that Kuvempu's belief in reincarnation, or whatever, his use of reincarnation as a trope here, seems to derive from Vivekananda. The influence is so strong. On the other hand, this whole attempt at mapping that time onto this time is a failure, because he gets confused between two different journeys of Vivekananda. He doesn't, he says one thing in one place, another thing in another place. That whole time frame is all messy. It doesn't work. Interestingly, because this is reminiscent of these kind of stories, the devotional films, for instance, where gods are talking about people and that kind of simultaneity. But that it works because that time is no time; it's eternity, and this time is our diurnal earthly time. Whereas here, in the case of Vivekananda, his time is also secular time. So his attempts to make these two coincide is a failure. And I thought about this question: why does he need this? Because in Kanure Garthi, what happens is this reformist idealist character comes imbued with these kinds of ideas that from Vivekananda, and then that is his. He wants to go to the village and somehow implement his ideas and so on. That's a different thing. Here, there is something else. I don't know. It's just a speculative thing on my part to say that this idealism, which is a forced kind of spiritual parallel that he tries to give the novel, the contents of the novel, is a kind of attempt to balance the otherwise sheer physicality, the materiality of the narrative, which has been stripped of all idealist elements. That's one of the extraordinary things about this novel, is that there is no character here, neither the hero as one might imagine, or the heroine, or the thing, no virtuous lady, no idealist hero, reformist, none of them, they do not exist. So Huvaya has gone out through the window. It's a more tolerant kind of, more generous kind of description of what there is than something which tries to see the world itself just through the reformist eyes. Somehow it's as if Kuvempu had thought, let's look straight at this world instead of, putting an idealist character, as is often the case in these kinds of novels, in the center of it, and make everything, see everything through their eyes. That is gone. It's completely out. And it's as if it's like an attempt to balance that, but the balancing fails. And, one of the extraordinary, I don't think there's another novel which, of this size and this kind of scope, which ends with two menstruating women cozily, lying in bed and thinking of the 3 days rest they're going to get happily and so on. It's for a thing of that. So it's physicality, materiality of the world and its relations, caste relations, for instance, here they do not acquire the idealist form of, this Brahmin Dalit binary, which is often invoked in caste-related discussions. Here, castes and tribes are living together in relations of oppression and exploitation, which are explicitly depicted. There's no mincing of words in this process. It's a very sharp and very thorough critique of caste society, but caste society is seen from a different place than one is used to, in other narratives or even academic renderings. Right? It looks different because the perspective is not something which is drawn from a generalized kind of, the people who know all about caste are not the ones who are at the heart of the novel, but the people who are actually living those caste relations. And so if there is a critical commentary here, it's done by Kuvempu himself in his narrative. And the realist element is completely in place. Standard language for the narrators and various dialectical forms for the things and so on. Right? Yeah, so of course that cannot come through in a novel, in a translation. So I would say this is a tremendously difficult book to translate, and I think it takes not only courage and a lot of deep fund of skills for anybody to attempt something like this, which is we should thank Vanamala for taking it up. And I think, in conclusion, I'll say two things. One is the editorial work, the publishers, editors have done no work on this. There are a lot of things which a writer cannot see, small things, various kinds of things. I'm afraid there are a lot of those things. And it's up to a publisher, but I have no idea. Did you even get a publisher's comment, and
There's an editor.
Editor said something about anything else? No. And that's the thing. Yeah, no, there's a lot of things I wish I could have done a good job of editing, but I find that today there are no good editors, actually. They seem to have gone, just vanished. Publishers don't seem to even bother to send to editors. And finally, I want to ask two questions based on the choices she makes as a translator. Two things that I want to point out, which you can respond to. One is, how appropriate is it to use the live-in as a translation for that relationship, that, Yeah, that is one. And the other is your use of the word it to translate she, which because of the Kannada saying adu. In Kannada, like in Telugu, there is the women in the third person, they say it. The equivalent of it is used. Now, I can get it that you want to inform the reader that such a usage exists, but I think by giving the it in quotation marks every time it occurs, something I just feel you're violating the integrity of that work. You can in paratextually you can point it out, but not introduce a kind of polemical or politically knowledgeable sort of thing into the novel. That seems to me to somehow, because it's a work with some integrity of its own. And these kinds of explanations and commentaries should not become part of the text because, I feel, those are some of the two, there were others, but I won't go into them.
Could you tell me what's the live-in problem with the living?
Live-in is a very recent sort of phrase, and there are more, conventional terms for, that kind of, when a married man has another woman, who either lives in the same house or in another house and so on. This is a very common, thing and so on. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Check. Yeah, good evening, and first of all, thanks to Nikhila for asking me to speak about this. Like many of you, I've been here, but only once as audience, and it's quite strange to be sitting here and doing what we routinely do every day, the academic discussion. Let me begin with a couple of disclaimers. One is that I haven't actually managed to complete the novel. But I must say that I think to my credit, I have managed to finish about 80 to 85% of the novel. And this is not because of the quality of the novel, but simply because this is a kind of a a kind of a childhood fear which I haven't yet overcome of thick books. That's how I actually ended up bypassing many classics, including Dickens and George Eliot. And I remember that the first Dickens book I forced myself to read was Hard Times, because it was small, and then it kind of allowed me to enter that Dickensian world. And I don't know, I must ask her in private what kind of drugs Vanamala is on, because she seems to have a thing for these big fat books. I remember her earlier book for the Murthy Classics Library, which equally was not this much, but equally kind of forbidding. And my second disclaimer is that, having seen Professor Susie Tharu and Professor Madhava Prasad with very prepared notes and things like that, I feel that I'm a little out of place, because my response is going to be very impressionistic. And it's again based on what I have managed to complete of the novel. And as a I don't know why, but as a matter of principle, I don't read the introductions and prefaces before I read the novel. So maybe once I read the introduction and the afterword, maybe I will get a greater insight into the novel. But right now, I began reading the novel. It was there on my table, and I kept looking at it. And one day, finally, I managed to gather enough courage to pick it up, started reading it. And initially, I thought, okay, since I'm going to talk about it, I must kind of, at least mentally, must keep track of what is happening in the novel. Then, when is it happening? Then I realized that it's futile. And then I said, okay, let me just forget about all this. Let me enjoy the story. So, and that's how I actually started reading, and I have kept no notes at all. There's only one place where I have marked the novel, and I'll come back to that later. But other than that, the usual practice of with a pencil in hand and keeping, marks for later use, etc. I haven't done it because, in a way, I felt that it is actually going against the very spirit of the novel. Because I read the first, epigraph, which says that nothing is important, nothing is unimportant. Then I realized that that is the spirit, in which the novel should be read. Not keeping necessarily track of, who is related to whom in what way, and when is this happening, and and why. I think to me that was the pleasure of reading this novel. Not worrying about, because I felt that the writer doesn't seem to be in a hurry to actually bring anything to a conclusion. And he seems to take pleasure in different stories. And who are we to say that one story should lead to, in a particular direction and, reach a conclusion? Because I think each chapter takes you completely away from what, you thought you are on track, and suddenly the next chapter takes you completely away. And then you realize, what the hell? This story is as interesting as the earlier one. So why should I just keep track of only one story, instead of just enjoying? And that is the reason why I felt, this novel simply flows. As long as you don't, like a typical academic, don't keep trying to take control of the novel. If you just leave yourself to let yourself be taken over by the novel, I think that's the best way to enjoy this novel. And so far, I've managed to enjoy this novel in that way. The second thing that I noticed in the novel, apart from this kind of a very relaxed lack of anxiety about where this novel is going, the other thing seems to be, to me, that I think that was mentioned earlier also, is that you don't see these kind of, stereotypical, representations. Yes, there is the caste discrimination. Yes, there is the class exploitation. But all that seems to be part of a life. And, this kind of this versus that, he versus the other, that doesn't seem to be, except, of course, as Professor Tharu mentioned, except, of course, like a kind of a sore thumb, the references to the Muslim characters, kind of stand out. Apart from that, I felt that this novel and its depiction of the social structure is much more, to me, it's much more relatable than this kind of very kind of thesis-oriented portrayals of characters and their relationships. Because yes, there are no villains and heroes here, because every victim also seems to be indulging in their own, imposing their victimization on others also. It's a very nuanced, very complex kind of relationship, which I think is very close to the real world, rather than the kind of stereotypical representations that we very often see in kind of novels. The other reason why I enjoyed the novel so far is, as has been mentioned, the translation. Apart from the strength of the story itself, or stories themselves, the translation flows very smoothly, except, once in a while I kind of flinched, because of a use of a couple of very American expressions, which I felt was slightly, I was taken aback. Yes, I routinely was pleasantly challenged by some of the words. I had to look up the dictionary, but it was a very pleasurable shock. Other than, of course, the Americanisms like beat it man, things like that. That sounded like slightly out of place. The other thing which, again, I probably could have been avoided, simply because it's me who is saying this, is some of those explanatory kind of footnotes, which again seem to kind of militate against the intended reader's ability to understand, because as Professor Tharu mentioned, the English that is used definitely has an Indian reader of English in mind. That's why it flows so smoothly. Given that kind of a reader, I thought some of the explanations were unnecessary. For example, women sitting out for 3 days during the menstrual period, which I thought maybe, again, it's my age, maybe the younger people may not recognize that. But I thought that did not need any explanation at all. So apart from that, I think the translation really flows very smooth, and the very fact that I actually managed to complete nearly 80% of the novel, shows that it really, once you pick up the courage to start the novel, actually, and if you give yourself to the flow of the story, I think it just takes you, and the credit for that, I think, goes to the translation, because the kind of number of characters, the scope of the novel, and the scale of the novel is mind-boggling. And if it doesn't really feel like that, I think the credit must go to the translator. And I say this again and again because we all know that translators don't really get the credit they deserve. Very often we say, oh, what a great writer he was. And let me also say that I have very little knowledge of the Colossus that Kuvempu was. Of course, I read a couple of poems here and there, maybe a story once in a while, but I am not familiar with Kuvempu's work. Of course, I know that he was a great writer, he's a cultural icon. Apart from that, I haven't actually read much of Kuvempu. That, again, is a kind of a completely different, predicament of us Indian readers, who would like to think that we are, Indian readers, but ultimately we don't know anything about even a neighboring language like Kannada and its literature. And therefore, I think I'm grateful to Vanamala for bringing Kuvempu to me as a reader. Of course, I've known a bit of Kannada writing, but of course only through translation. And therefore, I think we must acknowledge the importance and the role of translators to actually, make what Professor Tharu said, a kind of a nation. And I remember, and I'll end with that, long ago, Sujit Mukherjee once said that, let's not talk about Indian literature before we actually know a little bit about each other's literature. And therefore, I think one step towards knowing Indian literature is thanks to Vanamala's translation of Kuvempu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Vijay Kumar. Now, Dr. Imogene Hansdak.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Nikhila and for inviting me. And I would also like to admit, like the person who presented before me, that I too have not been able to complete the novel, sadly. And I have read about less than half, sadly. But I would also like to say that this is a very gripping novel, and when I was reading, when I was reading, I used to keep forgetting the names of the different places and the different characters. So I had made the habit of writing a short summary and analysis after every every day at the end of the day, because I read at night for at least 1 hour. I try to finish at least 50 pages, and then I would write a summary and an analysis. So I did this for 4 or 5 days, and then because I couldn't continue, so it stopped. But then this was something which helped me to remember what happened earlier. So I would read what I had already written earlier, then I would continue with it. So this was, as I said, I think many people might have experienced this, little bit difficult, because it's such a vast novel. Its canvas is so vast. So therefore, the journey is the journey takes us into all these different areas and different places. Different areas, and different characters, different groups. So you have all these different caste groups, as a result of which it was something that I had to do, because I couldn't remember. Many times I would forget the details. So I had to do this. Yes, and I also noticed something. There's this description of this very unpleasant man, Subana. Subana is this person who lives in this very dirty place, and he's got a brother, and brother has a tiled house, and he has another house which is not, it's the old house, and then there's a new house built by his brother, and there's a partition. So Subana is a very unpleasant character, but then at the same time he also seems to have a very redeeming quality, I would say. He's a person who loves animals a lot, and when the description of his love for animals is used, I thought that this had a rather mock heroic quality, because it elevates this person. So he is a person who lives among pigs. He loves even the smell of pigs is something which he seems to take delight in, and so there are areas where you are you expect that the writer would show some disgust, would show some kind of repulsion, but then there is a very generous kind of a quality in the writer, the author. He seems to feel a sympathy for all the characters that he makes. So I think that the author himself, she seems to be a person who's a humanist, a great humanist seems to be. Even if he talks about the problems of society, sometimes he talks about caste, but then I think he does seem to have this, this sympathy for all his characters. And as I said, even for the animals, for the dung beetle, for the small creatures, and then also for humans and the different caste groups. So overall, I would say that this is a very unique novel, and I think it deserves a very special place. I think it can be called one of the great novels of India, and even in the world. I think it's a very good novel, very wonderful novel, really good novel. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. Yeah, now that all the panelists have spoken, Vanamala, would you like to respond?
Before I forget, let me say these few things and then get down to some kind of a response. If there were a Nobel for translation, and if I had got it, if I were to get it, I think I wouldn't have been more happy than I am today, because my very good friends here have engaged with the text that has meant so much for me personally and for Kannada culture, and offered their views, and they have talked about it, and it's a very great privilege. Not too many translations get this privilege of having different speakers respond to it in the same forum, and therefore I'm very overwhelmed with gratitude. And the other quality about it is that there are different generations of readers and critics here. That again is a very special thing. There are senior, very senior people like Susie, who has taught us, and there are near contemporaries. They are younger, but to me, but still near enough to be called contemporaries, Madhava and Vijay, and there is the next generation person, Ivy. So to have this kind of a multi-generational response to a text is indeed a rare privilege for a translation. And as a teacher also, I think what I am receiving today is a high honor because thanks to Nikhila, she once introduced me in Pondicherry to her students she's a grand teacher, she said. I said, what is this grand teacher? She said, she's your teacher's teacher. So, but for that kind of affection and regard, something like this could not have happened. And so Nikhila and then Tharakeshwar, they've both been my students in Bangalore University. And while we were wrangling all the time, while we were at the university, but beneath that wrangling and discussions and, there was a lot of affection and commitment to each other, which is a very, very special quality, and that's what has drawn so many former students of the university here who have all gathered. So thanks to Nikhila and Tharakeshwar's magnet-like personalities, which has made it possible for an event like this. It is indeed very, very special today for me. Let me tell you, I hadn't quite bargained for what you are letting happen, that is, to respond to. I only said I'll listen to everybody. I didn't say I'll respond to everybody when I came here. Now there are all these views and very differing views, and it's hard to engage with everything that has been said with that kind of depth. And most of the critique or comments have also been on the original novel, on which there have been several books that have come out. Kuvempu is much written. And so I'm slightly lost in terms of to this, but just a couple of not correctives, but factual. He didn't take 31 years to write the book. He started, he read a piece of, in the newspaper one day saying a bride from a Vukkaliga Gauda community on the day of her wedding ran away to marry her lover. And that was a great scandal. And he had that cutting for a long time with him. And then, he started writing this novel, but after some 80 pages or so, he put it aside. And then he, wrote the other novel, Kanuru. But after that, he wrote this big epic, Ramayana Darshanam. And he came back to it in 1962. Around 1962-63, and that is when he asked his daughter to look for a map. Now, we are talking of maps today. So she writes in her autobiography, the Kuvempu as seen by the daughter, in that book. She says, I was looking for a map. She was somewhat like his secretary, who would help him with documents and lost notes and things like that. So she was looking for something like a drawing of a map. He said, map siktanaka, and she couldn't find it. So one day, Kuvempu himself was sitting down, and he had opened the last drawer and then taken out slips of paper and so on. Then on his face there was a very happy surprise, on his face, a smile. Then he said, I got the map. So what was that map? It was not our usual map, but more like a diagram with many different characters connected, right? The name here, a name written like this, a name written like this, a name written like that. So that is the map he was talking about. And after that, he started writing, and I think he finished it in 3 or 4 years' time. So that is the kind of the biography of the book, as it were.
It was already there in the 30s. So it is.
Yeah. This map was there, and then the wedding itself, the running away, and the wedding happens in 1893. So that is the time frame he is looking at, and not so much the 1920s, as it were. So, but of course there is a future projection, and all those things are there, and the repercussions of it, all of that. So this is not to say that it ended there or anything, but the year we are looking at is, as Madhava was saying, it is for such a big novel, the time period in which it happens is rather short. A few months, 4 months, maybe 5 months, that's it. Because there's a reference to a seasonal change. Some rainy season, had given way and things like that. So it's that kind of indication you get, not a specific date as such, but it's not a very long time. That much you know. So that is the kind of date we are looking at. And when the book was published in Kannada, the modernist movement was at its height, and the immediate reaction to the book was it kind of undermined the book in some ways, because it had multiple centers. Having multiple centers was sometimes misread as having no center, right? So it was a new kind of narrative. While his first novel represented the realist novel, as a mode in every way, this was a break from that. It was a departure from that, and therefore we needed to have other ways of reading this novel, which was at that point not very available. And in fact, most critics have said, do we have the right equipment to read and appreciate a novel like this, which defies our notions of a given a novel as a genre. So that is the other part. And then there have been Dalit critiques of Kuvempu. Someone like B. Krishnappa had commented on Kuvempu's treatment of Dalits, and even somebody like Rahmat Tarikere, who is a very serious-minded thinker and critic in Kannada. He has talked about how today, if Kuvempu were writing, even Kuvempu could not have written the way he has about Muslims. So that's a kind of critique that has internally also within the culture, but the very best that Kannada could offer. So one has to pause and think about, then what is it? Why is it that a whole culture which has a very rich body of writing, fiction, fictional writing, in what ways is it significant? And in what is it then? So to my mind, 2-3 things stand out when I look at the novel. One is that there is a spirit of defiance in the novel among the characters, especially among women. Right. So I think that's a very rare portrayal, and they are always trying to get a better life for themselves, and they're ready to take risks, and they are ready to, they are resilient, they stand by what they have done, and they try to make a go of it. And that is a very, great quality. The kind of, there's rebellion at the heart of this novel. A certain non-acceptance of the status quo. Important message, or a very important aspect of the work that comes through to us. But while portraying all these characters in a very nuanced, candid way, Kuvempu is also interested in not just limiting them to those particular identities, but he also wants to give them a chance to get out of it and experience what could be, for a lack of a better word, called transcendental. To overcome and experience life in all its complexity and yet its beauty. Those are the beautiful moments. Like Ivy mentioned, how Subbana Hegde, he may be a creature of this land and this kind of life, but even he is able to admire and experience the early morning sun and feel a sense of being one with all these, the environment around him. So in many ways, I think Kuvempu is a humanist at its his humanism is not limited to one or two heroes, but a humanism which takes in different layers of society, and therefore not just human life, but also in relation to the environment. So in a way, it's a kind of a very cosmic vision that you have here. So what he himself called Purna Drishti, the kind of inclusivity that he could bring to. So this kind of transcendence being a transformative kind of a possibility for everybody. That's why he says, no one is here, no one is important, no one is unimportant, nothing is insignificant. So in a way, it's a whole worldview there, which is inclusive. And in today's world of so many divisions, I think this vision of his ideal is, in one of the songs which are famous in Kannada, O Nanna Chetana, he says, Rupa Galanu Dati, go beyond the forms that are given. Nama Koti Galanu Meti, go beyond the names, the naming we have done. And Ediye Beriye Bhavaditi, O Nanna Chetana, Aguni Aniketana. So he's saying, oh my spirit, become unbound, become unhoused, unfettered. That's the song. And then he also says, Nuru Matada Hotta Thuri. You kind of winnow away, the dusk, the husk rather. Yeah, so yes, it has been a very challenging experience because there are very different registers that the text follows. There is a very, it's an omniscient narrative, and therefore there is a very, from top kind of, a kind of reflective prose, and then there's a descriptive. So, while dialogue is one way in which you establish the individuality of the character, that's not the only way. There is a mannerism, there is a way of thinking, there's a way of dressing, and maybe the way they interact with other characters. All these things establish a character. And therefore, I'd like to think that, yes, dialects are a challenge for translators, but there are ways in which one can overcome that and establish voice not so much through the sound of their voice, but through other ways of, their being. So that's a choice one can exercise, and I have tried to exercise that. But for Beat It, for instance, I wonder if there's a problem with that. It's a way of, I'm not too sure. So that's a possibility. Now, about it, that's a very interesting, I really debated how to portray this Adu, in Adu in Kannada, to refer to a human being. So it's a very tricky thing. If you say it in the same, let's say, chapter, if the word comes, then giving a note and moving on would help. Just one reference. But if it comes after 5, chapters, this reference to it, should I expect the reader to remember that reference? And if I
Why should they remember?
No, otherwise it will be a bit odd, not to find suddenly it for a reference to a human being. It.
She.
But Adu means it.
Adu means she. When it is addressed to women, to people, it's about women, it means she. It's not it.
Proudly so that all of us can share this debate.
See, this is an expression we have in South Indian languages. Generally, I feel, maybe not, at least in Telugu also it's there, Kannada. It's like you are implying that every time it is used, it's the conscious distinction of that person as a thing.
Yeah.
I am saying you have to be lexical about it. It be in Kannada, in Telugu, in Tamil. It has two meanings: that thing and her. These are the two meanings of the word it, as opposed to some other language in which there is only one meaning of it. Right? So, for cultural knowledge purposes, you can indicate.
Sure. I think the translator, because in my understanding, Kuvempu was polemicizing it by using it that way. I thought I needed to do that. But let me complexify this by one more angle. See, like the Hulia is a dog. And the hero of this novel is Hulia, according to many people. So, and this Hulia is always accompanying Gutti. He is Gutti Hulia, Hulia Gutti, Nai Gutti. That's his very name. So, at one point, so we wanted to know, should I use he for Hulia or it? Because dogs are usually referred to as he also, if it's a male dog. But we said it gets very confusing, the pronoun, when it refers to Gutti, when it refers to Hulia, because both are treated with, equally humanly. Dog, is caught up in a maelstrom, and there is a flooding, and he dies. And he's been very brave, and he tries his very best. So all along there, it was he. I had come back to he. Then, like the second print was going to happen 15 days ago. They said, if you want to change anything, you could change. I said, no, I won't change it. Let the inconsistency be there. I'll let Hulia be he in this last chapter where he dies. He deserves to be a he here. So, I think inconsistencies are very much a part of translations in some ways, because of a certain way of reading things, a certain way of doing things.
But I'm sorry, we are running way behind schedule. So we will have the discussion with the panelists and the translator during tea time. In fact, I myself had a couple of questions, not so much about the novel, but about the process of translation, you know, the positionality of a translator, the idea of a reader, whether you when you began your project, did you have at the back of your mind, you know, to what kind of a reader you are translating this book, and also whether the translator has a sense of responsibility to the text, ended without question answer session, but you can definitely meet them and discuss during tea time. Thank you all very much, and we will move on now to the book release.
Thanks to all of you for being patiently listening to all this conversation, and thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the wonderful discussion, and thank you all the panelists and also Gita ma'am for moderating this session. Now we'll move on to the book release. The next book release is Anveshi's Different Tales series. I invite Dr. Sukanya Kanarally and Deeptha Achar, who worked on this project, to come on to stage. Deeptha Achar and Dr. Sukanya Kanarally. Now I request Professor Vanamala Viswanatha to release the books. Claps, please. Now I request Dr. Sukanya Kanarally, the Kannada editor of the Different Tales series, to introduce the books to our audience.
Good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here. Thanks, Nikhila and Tharakeshwar. Different Tales, children's stories from marginal cultures and regional languages, is an Anveshi project, ongoing project. Now we are doing it in Kannada. Kannada publication has taken quite some time, almost 10 years. You find a publisher. Everyone I approached, they would say, Kannadadalli yaru kollalla ರೀ, ಓದೋದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರು. They don't read at all, and if the production cost is very high, all the more. If they can afford, they will buy books in English, but not in Kannada. So finally, after 10 years, we could find an activist publisher. He had to be an activist in order to take this initiative and produce the books. I think Different Tales, children's stories from marginal cultures and in regional languages, I think it is self-explanatory. This is a different kind of, as Susie was saying, it's a kind of politically loaded project. The main of it is to unsettle the notion of a child from a normative family. Children is most of the times mainstream, run-of-the-mill kind of. So how do we shape our children's imagine, their sensibilities, etc.? Now, So I have a series of wonderful, wonderful stories with brilliant, vibrant illustrations. When I first read them in English, I was really fascinated. And when the editorial role was offered to me, I said, yes, I'm good doing it with all my heart. But publication was an issue. In March 2004, we released 2 books, Avana Horata and Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu. They're different. I mean, Kelalu Sigada Antakshana, of course, unheard. Interestingly, the books were released on a very big platform. Chief Minister Siddaramaiah was there. This was a 2-day seminar on March 1st and 2nd. The seminar was on anxieties of the Indian democracy. It was timed properly, before the elections, and so it was a conscious choice. And we had many scholars and thinkers, Teesta and Brinda, and so many others from Karnataka, historians and scholars. And so the book was released. 2 books were published, but we also printed some sample copies of the books that are getting released today. And we released them in March, but only 2 books were allowed to roll out, in the sense they were the ones printed in 2,000 copies or something. Avana Horata matte Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu. Yeah, in these 6 months, the way the books have been sold it's quite interesting actually. Ganesh, a publisher, told me that all the 2,000 copies of Avana Horata have been sold. Not a single copy. This is my copy. Yeah, so I brought it here. We have published it. And in Avana and Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu, Avana Horata 1,000 copies gone. Kelalu Sigada 100 plus remaining, which means it is not true that there are no buyers. Yes, there is a class parameter attached to who buys them and whose children read them, etc., etc. So I asked my publisher, our publisher, Kannada publisher, why one went around and the other did not, because he supplies books to government schools. Those are the buyers, if there is funds support. So I asked him, how come that was sold and not this? They could have bought both, once they know what the books are about. He said, most of the times the teachers who make a choice are women, and Avana Horata strikes a chord. If the children could choose, they would have chosen Skulu Kategalu, Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu. So that is another question altogether, who buys the books for children, as much as who writes the stories for children, etc. But now we have these 2 books, Shabash Badaiya Matte Tataki, set in a lower caste class world. They were translated from Telugu. Avana Horata was written by Kancha Ilayya. It was directly translated from Telugu into Kannada by an English professor who is a big time fan of Kancha Ilayya as well. And Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu, of course, it's a collection of stories, and I have translated one of them. In that, but Tataki and Badaiya, as the names themselves suggest, their battles are different, the settings are different, but it's not like, pointing to the victimhood of these children, but celebrating their resilience. So they're not stories talking about, in a grim tone, talking about those characters. So right now we have Kelalu Sigada Skulu Kategalu matte Shabash Badaiya and Tataki. We have some limited copies, and please buy them. We'll go back to Mysuru and tell our publisher that, in Hyderabad all the copies got sold. Because when I come to Hyderabad, I met Vijay somewhere, and I was saying, what a shame. We live in the same city, but we happen to meet in Hyderabad. We don't meet in Mysuru so much. Yes, and this is another story, Dinaglu Kagda Akaji. This is originally written in Kannada, not translated. This was written by Du Saraswati, and wonderful description of the children going to meet their grandmother, and the way their world, the way they look at things, hear things, and how they respond, their way of cooking, and everything unfolds in vibrant details. I mean, this is also, as Susie said in the morning, one of the gems actually. So vivid and so... Anyway, I'm truly in love with these stories, and the visuals speak so much, so rich in... Deeptha is one of the grandmothers of different tales. I came later. They have been there from the start, and, right from the conception and, and all that. So, but the translation part, this morning I was talking about how do we go about translating, since we are talking about translation, this is a diverse collection, delightfully diverse collection. Can I use standard Kannada and homogenize all these different cultural worlds? I thought about it, and then I felt that the children should be at least made to know that there are different dialects in Kannada. So how much of dialect, like Mangalore Kannada, Dharwada Kannada, coastal Kannada, Kodagu hatra iro Kannada, ಅಥವಾ Tamil, Telugu border areas ಅವರು ಮಾತಾಡುವಂಥ ಕನ್ನಡ, ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಸಜೆಸ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಗೆ ತರಬೇಕು? First, I cherry picked my translators, from different parts of Karnataka, and I asked them to translate, and they translated, their mane matu, home tongue, what we call, and I used my grandniece as the guinea pig for, giving me the feedback. At first she read all the stories, but she took her own time and she said, why are they using such complicated words? ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಒತ್ತಕ್ಷರ ಯಾಕೆ, ನಂಗೆ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಓದಕ್ಕೆ. So then that made me think about the readability of the narratives. Of course, there are in Kannada children's stories set in Dharwada, but they are not sold in other regions. For example, there is one Kadambari for children written by Anand Patil, wholly written in Dharwada Kannada, Dum Dum Urige Dim Dim Gadi anta. Beautifully written in, the children form a human train, and then, they go around the small town, stopping at each station. They call it a station, station, signal vidilla, sumniri, all these. And the whole small town unfolds in all its cultural nuances. Who says children's stories are only for children? I was fascinated reading that. So, to me, what kind of reader, intended reader, who was she? Then I felt that, for different tales, I want a pan-Karnataka reader, he or she should be from Dharwada and Mangaluru and all that. So second draft of the translations, I restricted the use of the dialect only to the dialogues. And then I gave it to her. I had to bribe her. She said, you want me to read them again? I said, yeah, please. This is a child's response, she's totally conditioned to read children's stories of a different sort, and I should be patient with her. And second time she read them pretty fast, and I was happy, and I knew that readability should be my priority. So second draft, and after that, my editorial role came in, though, everything was in its raw form. My editorial thing was give it some kind of readability for all the narratives, keeping a urban child, semi-urban, rural, caste, class, gender, keeping all these parameters in mind. How do I shape a narrative? So we have done it. I mean, these two books have, the next set is going to be out next March. We have 10 books in line, and we are going to do it maybe by the end of 2025, all these 10 books. And of course, we are thinking of, getting more stories in Kannada. Ask some, especially I'm thinking of asking Anand Patil, for example, to write a narrative for us. And Du Saraswati is a brilliant story writer. And I want Kannadigas in Hyderabad, to give us the feedback, how it reads and what can be done. Of course, Tharakeshwar and Nikhila, they have my email ID, and I would be very happy, if I can receive some feedback from you. Thank you very much.
Tharakeshwar sir to come on stage and read a small portion from this series.
Good evening. I will not take much time. I will just get into the reading. This is a story written by Goggu Shyamala in Telugu and translated into Kannada by Rajini Garuda. This is about a family and a boy who goes to school, and he is the only fellow who goes to school regularly in that village, and it is in the family setting. I am going to read only the last part of the story. In the family, the mother is there's some problem with her leg, and she has to next day she has to go to work, and she has to cook and look after the entire family. And this is the conversation between the father and the mother. ಮಾರನೆಯ ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಎಂದಿನಂತೆ ಎದ್ದರು. ಎಂಕಯ್ಯ ದ ಫಾದರ್, ನೀ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಕಾಡಿಗೆ ಬರ್ತಿ, ಕಾಲಿ ಗಾಯ ಆಗೈತಲ್ಲ, ಮನೆಯಾಗ ಇರು ಎಂದ. ರಾತ್ರಿ ಇಡೀ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮನ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಸರದಿಯಂತೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಔಷಧಿ ಎಲೆಗಳ ಬೆಚ್ಚನೆಯ ಪಟ್ಟಿಯನ್ನು ಹಾಕುತ್ತಾ ಆರೈಕೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದರು. ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಆರಾಮ ಎನಿಸಿದರೂ ಸಹ ಮೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಸ್ತು ಇತ್ತು. ಆದರೂ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂರಲು ಮನಸ್ಸು ಒಪ್ಪಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದ ವೈಫ್ ಟು ದಿ ಹಸ್ಬೆಂಡ್, ಕೆಲಸ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಹೆಂಗ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತಿರ್ಲಿ, ನಾನು ಬರಾಕೆ ಸರಿ, ಆದರೆ ಎಕ್ಕಡ ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ, ಮತ್ತೆ ನನ್ನ ರಾತ್ರಿ ಕೋಟಿಗೆ ಏನಾದರೂ ಔಷಧಿ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ದ ಹಸ್ಬೆಂಡ್, ಎಕ್ಕಡವನ್ನೇನೋ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಆದ್ರೆ 2-3 ದಿನ ಬೇಕು. ನೀನು ರಾತ್ರಿ ಕೂಡಿ ನಂಗೆ ಅಚ್ಚಿಗೆ ನೀವು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ನಾನು ನಿನಗೆ ಯಾವಾಗಿಂದ ಹೇಳಕತ್ತೀನಿ, ಹೊಸ ತಾಳ್ಮೆಯಿಂದ ಆಜು ಬಾಜು ಮಂದಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡು, ಮತ್ತ 1-3 ವಾರ ಹಂಗ ತಿನ್ಕೊಂಡಿರು, ನಿಂಗೆ ಆರಾಮ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ ಅಂತ. ನೀ ಯಾವಾಗ ನನ್ನ ಮಾತು ಕೇಳ್ತಿ ಬಿಡು. ಬೇಡ್ ತಿನ್ನೋ ವಿಚಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಬೀಳ, ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಕೆಟ್ಟೆ ಬಿಡು. ಯಾಕ ನೀ ಏನು ಗುರ್ತಿಲ್ದವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಬೇಡ್ತೀಯೇನು, ಬೇರೆ ಜಾತಿಯವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಬೇಡ್ತೀಯೇನು, ನಮ್ಮ ಆದಿಗ್ರ ಹತ್ರನೇ ತಾನೇ, ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮೋರೇ, ನೀ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಅನ್ಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ವೆಂಕಯ್ಯ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮನನ್ನು ಸಮಾಧಾನ ಪಡಿಸಲು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನಿಸಿದ. ಅಷ್ಟಲ್ಲ, ನಿಂಗೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಎಕ್ಕಡ ಬೇರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಂದೇ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬಾರ್ದಾ ಅಂತಂದು. ತನ್ನ ಅವ್ವ ಅಪ್ಪ ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತಿರುವುದನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿ ಬಡೆಯ ಎದ್ದ. ಬಾಪು ಬಾಪು, ಅವಂಗೆ ಹಾಕಿದೆ ಎಕಡ ಆಯ್ತಿ, ನಿಂದ್ಯಾಕೆ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಡಕತ್ತಿ ಎಂದು ಹೇಳುತ್ತಾ ಹೊಸ ಎಕ್ಕಡವನ್ನು ತೆಗೆದು ಅವನ ಕಾಲ ಬಳಿ ಇಟ್ಟ. ಇಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯವೋ ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯ. ಈ ಎಕ್ಕಡುಗಳ್ತಿ ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ತಂದಿ? ಇಬ್ರು ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು. ನಾ ಮಾಡೀನಿ, ಬಡೆಯ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯಿಂದ ಹೇಳ್ದ. ಅವನ ಧ್ವನಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಖುಷಿ ತುಂಬಿ ತುಳುಕ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು. ಎಂಕಯ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲಮ್ಮರಿಗೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಕಣ್ಣುಗಳನ್ನು ತಮಗೇ ನಂಬಲಾಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಂತ ಚೆಂದ ಮಾಡಿಯೇ ಮಗ ಎಂದು ಉದ್ಗಾರ ತೆಗೆದ್ರು. ಸಂತೋಷ ಜಿನುಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಧ್ವನಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಎಂಕಯ್ಯ ಹೇಳ್ದ, ತಗ ತಗ ನಿನ್ನ ಮಗನೇ ಎಕಡ ಮಾಡ್ಯಾನ, ಆಕಳಮಿ ಹಾಕೊಂಡ. ಮತ್ತ ನೀವೊಬ್ಬರೇ ಎಕಡ ಮಾಡೋದು ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿರಾ? ನನ್ನ ಕೊನೆ ಮಗ ಮುತ್ತಯ್ಯ, ಅವನೇನು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅವ ಒಂದು ಬಂಗಾರದ ಬೆಟ್ಟ ಇದ್ದಂಗ. ನೀವೇನು ಅವಂಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡೋದು ಬೇಡ, ಎಲ್ಲಾನು ನೋಡೇ ಕಲಿತಾನ. ಎಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಬಡೆಯದನ್ನು ಹೊಗಳುವುದು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಕಾಣಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ದಿನ ಕಾಡಿನಿಂದ ಹಿಂದಿರುಗಿ ಬಂದ ಮೇಲೆ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಹತ್ತಿರ ಮಗನನ್ನು ಹೊಗಳಿದ್ದು. ನೋಡ್ರಿ ನನ್ನ ಸಣ್ಣ ಮಗ ನಂಗಂತ ಹೊಸ ಎಕಡ ಮಾಡ್ಯಾನ, ಬರೀ ನೋಡ್ಕಲ್ತಾನ್ರಿ, ನೋಡ್ಕಲ್ತಾನ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll be moving on to the next book release titled Print and the Novel in the 19th Century Kerala, Reconsidering Modernity. I invite the author of the book, Dr. Ashokan Nambiar, onto the stage. As he arrives, let me introduce very quickly. There are only 2 lines I could gather. Dr. Ashok Nambiar works in the Center for Humanities at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, where he teaches the novel and narrative motifs. His area of interests include literary history, literary cultures, and print cultures. I would like to invite Professor Nikhila also onto stage. Yeah, please, ma'am. Because as she said in the introduction, is the student from his her first batch. Now I will invite Dr. Susie Tharu to release Ashokan Nambiar's book, Print and the Novel in the 19th Century Kerala, Reconsidering Modernity. Please, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you so much. There will be a memento. There will be a memento distribution for all the panelists for your patience, I think. It's a really long time, please.